on how to review translations on Applanga. My name is Aisha Amin, and I'm the Customer Success Manager for Applanga. My job here is to help customers use the platform effectively and efficiently. I help users learn the ins and outs of Applanga, and I assist with any issues that may come up while localizing projects. If you ever have any questions, run into any problems, or anything at all, really, I'm here to help. And joining me today behind the scenes is Christian Stanka, CEO and co-founder of Applanga. He's going to be the man behind the curtains today to help us with a smooth webinar, and he'll help with any questions that may come up as we progress through the content.
Thank you, Aisha. Hello, everyone. About the questions, we will handle them at the end. Please feel free to use the chat during the panel, during the webinar. Just post your question there, either so everyone can see it if you're fine with that, or you can send it directly to me too. Just feel free to post them at any time in any way you think appropriate, and we will handle them at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. So with our introductions out of the way, let's go ahead and go over the agenda for this webinar. To start with, we'll cover some of the pros of reviewing translations on Applanga. Then we'll go over the basics, things like draft versus target translations, statuses and what they actually mean, issues you might see like outdated translations, and anything else that's relevant to translation review. Once we cover the basics and terminology, I'll show you how to actually review translations on Applanga. I'll show you how to filter for and find translations that need review, how to update statuses to help manage your review workflows, how to revise and publish drafts, and things along those lines. Lastly, I'll walk you through some of the most helpful review features like user groups and custom statuses. We'll show you how they work, how to set them up, and how you can incorporate them into your overall workflow process. Now, there's a lot of content for us to cover today, and as Christian just said, we'll actually be saving time at the end of the webinar for questions. So as we move through the webinar, please feel free to post your questions in the chat, or you can send them to Christian directly using the chat feature. If you miss anything due to an urgent email or a call, absolutely no worries. We are recording this session today, so after the call, I'll send out a link to the recording as well as a link to some helpful documentation. So with our agenda out of the way, let's dive right in with some of the pros of reviewing translations on Applanga. So on Applanga, we try to make it easy to review translations, whether using transperfect translations or outside translation services. You can add reviewers to your Applanga teams and set up notifications for those reviewers to streamline and organize your workflows. Everything lives all in one place, so you can easily track the process and the progress via statuses and even inspect translation changes via the changelog. If you choose to add screenshots to your projects, reviewers can also navigate through the screens to get that much needed context. When translations are added to Applanga, Applanga flags common issues like translations that are longer than the source text or missing variables. If reviewers are concerned about certain translations, follow-up translation orders can be created using statuses set during the review phase. Applanga also has a dedicated user role just for reviewers, well, reviewers/translators. That role only allows users to create and update drafts. If you have a live integration, this could prevent the less technically proficient users from accidentally publishing entries before the whole team is ready. Adding the reviewers to your Applanga team is a pretty quick and easy process. Once added, those with the reviewer/translator role can easily and quickly access the in-context editor for a given project. From there, they can review translations, update drafts, change statuses, many of the things I've mentioned so far. In addition to the feature-rich in-context editor, Applanga boasts some other features to help manage your overall translation review workflows. Like the user groups I just mentioned earlier, you can add those to your teams to help direct specific users to specific languages. You can also configure custom statuses to accommodate any custom translation workflows that may work best for you and your teams. Last but not least, if you don't feel comfortable adding reviewers to your Applanga teams, or maybe you don't have enough seats on Applanga and don't want to add more seats, you can still easily review translations offline. Users do have the option to export draft translations via an Excel file. That file can then be passed on to reviewers outside of Applanga. As long as you don't touch the string IDs in the Excel file, that Excel file can then be re-imported back into your project after it's been reviewed. All right. So now that we've covered some of the pros of reviewing translations on Applanga, let's go over some of the basics. A lot of our features exist to help manage many types of translation workflows, and that includes translation review, of course. One of the bigger features is the integrated orders with transperfect translations. When these translations are delivered back to Applanga, they're added as drafts with a status of needs review. This is the default delivery type, but if you need it to be changed to target, that can be accommodated too. So with the default delivery of drafts, users are able to quickly find the most recent translations for review. You can simply filter for unpublished translation. For our purposes, draft and unpublished are synonymous. If you're using a live integration between your app and an Applanga project, then those drafts are only visible in the Applanga dashboard or if you have draft mode enabled. This allows you to review and tinker with translations before publishing live to your customers. In other words, publishing means you're promoting these draft translations to target translations. So again, draft and unpublished are synonyms, and then target and published are synonyms. So in addition to draft versus target translations, we also have statuses that can be assigned to entries in your projects. These statuses can be used to help organize the translation workflow. Applanga provides 4 basic statuses. We've got needs translation, needs review, accepted, and rejected. We also have one for in orders, but that's not something you set yourself. It's something that's automatically done when you place a translation order. Users can also create custom statuses at the team level. Whatever additional steps you need in the workflow can be added with these custom statuses. Maybe you have very technical terms that require additional specialized review. You could flag these with a custom status to accommodate that particular workflow. So while there are statuses to track the workflow, we also have warnings to alert users to any errors. The most common issues include missing variables, missing glossary terms, translations that are longer than the source text, validating for forbidden characters, and outdated translations. Some of these are a little more self-explanatory than others, but I'll go through a couple of the most common. In case you include variables with your strings, those are highlighted in gray and prevented from being translated when sent to transperfect translations. This helps ensure that a variable is not accidentally edited, causing issues in your app. However, if you are manually making updates on the dashboard, or maybe you're using an outside translation service, if a variable is accidentally deleted from a translated string, or maybe it was changed in a translation, like a bracket was accidentally deleted, this will automatically be flagged in the editor. The next most common one is for outdated translations. Projects get outdated translations in pretty specific circumstances. This is when a user makes changes to the source text while there is an active open order for translations. If changes are made to the source text while that string is included in an open order, those changes are not are not pushed to the order since that content is already with Transperfect. That being said, when the translation is delivered back to the project, it will be flagged as outdated. Again, this is something that can be easily filtered for and approved, or you can include it in subsequent translation orders. The last common warning is for validations. Applanga users have the option to configure and enforce forbidden characters within string values. That being said, only content manually edited on Applanga is monitored for those forbidden characters. These characters are typically things that can cause issues in a live app. Again, all of these most common issues can be quickly found in a project by using the filter options. All right, so before we move from the basics and terminology and on to the how-tos of review, I want to quickly cover user roles and permissions when it comes to translation reviews specifically. Starting with the least permissions to the most, we have the translator/reviewer role. These roles are only able to write drafts, but they're not able to publish those drafts. They can still update statuses, but that's really about the extent. Managers can add reviewers and translators to a team or a user group, and then they can also create, edit, and delete both draft and target translations. And of course, they can publish draft translations. Also, they can place orders for translations. Admins have the same permissions as managers, but they can also create user groups and add both managers and translators/reviewers to those groups. Obviously, an owner of a team can do all of the above, plus a little more behind the scenes. So these roles can accomplish much more on the Applanga dashboard. These are just some of the basics when it comes to translation review. Okay, so now that you know the basics, let's proceed to the how-tos, like how to filter, how to use the filter options, update statuses, stuff like that. So let me close my PowerPoint and I'll navigate to my demo project. Where is it? Here we go. All right. Actually, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so for this project, I have translations that were delivered as drafts with a status of needs review for English US. I also have a couple of warnings in this project. You'll see some custom statuses and a few other examples for us to walk through. I am logged in with an owner account. However, I will point out how a translator/reviewer can use a project dashboard as well. Before we actually start reviewing translations, I want to point out a couple of helpful color codings we use on the project dashboard. If you look at each language included in a project, you'll see we have some color coding to the right and the left of the language name. We do this to give you a high-level overview when it comes to the progress of your project. I typically like to start on the right-hand side and work my way over. So each of these color-coded dots references a total number of entries and whether those entries have translations, drafts, untranslated. We'll go through each one. So our blue one on the far right, that's going to give us a total number of entries in the project. The gray, that's going to represent the total number of locked entries. This means the translations can't be edited unless locked first. Next, we have green for existing translations. Then we have yellow for draft and red for untranslated. This just means that there's no draft, there's no target, you really just have the source text. Oh, I guess it would make more sense if I use the language and not my base language. On the other side of the divider, this is where we start to get into statuses. The blue is going to be the total number of entries in an open order. Once you get these entries delivered back to Applanga, they will no longer be in order and they'll go to that needs review. The total number of needs translation entries is our yellow. And for green, we have the total number of entries with needs review. If we come all the way to the left side, we've got a little bit more color coding here. As you can tell, we really like our color coding to help try and keep things organized. With this one, we can see we've got some drafts and, we've got drafts and published translations. In this one, we've got some completely untranslated and some drafts. And down in my Spanish, you can see that they're all untranslated. And if we come over a little bit, we can see that they're all in an open order. So since we're going to be reviewing translations, I could click on the larger yellow option for unpublished or draft translations, but I don't want to take the easy way. I want to get you guys a little bit more familiar with the filter. So let's actually open up our editor and filter from there. I'll give it a second. All right, so now that we have English US open, you may notice a couple of colored status indicators. And if I scroll down, you'll see a couple warnings in here. I could scroll and see each of them one by one, or I could use my handy dandy filter to find what I need to review first. I can use the filter to limit my view based on any of these options. I could find unpublished or untranslated. I could filter based on status, including a custom status. I could filter based on tag categories, duplicates. I could use with issues. Again, some of those things we talked about earlier, outdated translation or outdated draft, translations that are longer than the source text, variable missing. I also have the option to filter using a custom filter. I can mix and match here to give me a more specific filtered view. But in this case, I'm just going to go with unpublished. Actually, let's do needs review. Let's mix it up a little. All right. So again, for this project, my translations have the default delivery options. So they are drafts with the status of needs review. Since I filtered for unpublished or needs review, it will show me exactly what was delivered. I think, yeah, we did needs review this time. Since this project has screenshots, I could also include them as part of my review. I can click on the screen's thumbnail to the left of my string, and then I open up our screens view here. Now, I do have the option to limit screen by screen review to specific screens. What I mean is the screens list also corresponds to any filter applied to the overall strings list. Like since I filtered for needs review, only the screens with strings in the needs review state will display. So if I switch to my per screen, I still have these that are in the needs review status. We can tell by these little status markers on the far right. But I'm going to close this for now so we can just focus on the actual review process. All right, so starting from this point, I'm going to walk through these next steps as if my user role was just translator/reviewer instead of switching between accounts with different user roles. So please bear with me and use your imagination a little bit. Depending on the scope, the review process can include either directly editing the translations, aka changing current drafts or adding new drafts, or the scope could just be accepting and or rejecting translations through the status. So let's say during the review process, I need to make some updates to translations. As a reviewer, I'll only be able to update the draft. Now, I'm most familiar with American English, and here I do see a British English spelling. So this is a draft I should update. I can click on the text itself to update it. And as a translator/reviewer, I would only see the yellow check mark to save as draft. Other user roles like the manager, admin, and owner will also have this double green check mark, and that will save my draft as a target. Again, this is publishing this draft translation if I were to click this double green. Let's go ahead and change my translation, and then I'll save as a draft. All right, let me show you one other way to edit. I can click anywhere on the entry, but not on the text itself. Right? From here, I could update the draft as well. And if I were logged in as just translator/reviewer, I would just have this save option. However, since I'm logged in as an owner, or if an admin or a manager were logged in, they could press this approve button, and that would essentially publish this draft and turn it into target. All right. One other thing I want to show you while I'm in here is the changelog. So with the changelog, I can see what changes have been made to this particular string. This will show me what's changed and who has changed it. If translations have changed, I can actually just click to see exactly how it's changed. But again, we love our color coding. So we see that red means I removed it and green means it's something that's been added. We also include a couple of different filter types in here. So this is just translation changes. I could go by all types. I could filter by users and then just update the filter. All right, so I'll close this so we can move on. Okay, so now that I've updated my draft translation, I'll consider it reviewed. In this case, I want to update the status. I can update the statuses in bulk or individually, because again, I'm walking through this as if I were a translator/reviewer. I've really only reviewed the one translation here, but let's pretend I reviewed all of these. I can click individual checkboxes to do just a couple at a time, or I can click the checkbox up top, and that will select all of these strings in this filtered view. Now to update my status, I'll click state. We're no longer in needs review. We're actually going to accept these. I can also enter a comment here. I'll just say, and those comments will be included in the changelog. From here, I could add a tag, and I could also apply the status across all languages or individual languages. And one last time, we do have the changelog down here as well. This is for the whole project, not for the individual string. So when I click save, the status and comment will be applied to all of the selected strings. All right, I've got the right status, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now I'll click save. All right, so now I will need to update my filter view. And if I go to, oh, did that not work? There we go. Let me refresh the page. There we go. So with a refresh, we see that we've got 43 translations with the accepted status. All right. I do want to make one very important note here. Updating the status of translations is not the same thing as publishing, even though I have updated the status to accepted. While this entry now has a status of accepted, it has not been published. So users with admin or manager roles, or even an owner, will still need to publish the translations. Remember, a translator/reviewer can't publish. So at this point, we'll pretend I switched and I'm using my admin role so I can publish translations. So My strings have the updated status. I filtered for my accepted. And now I want to actually publish. So again, I could do these individually, or I can select them all. I'll grab the more drop down. All right. You'll have to pardon me here. There we go. So I filtered for unpublished, and now I can click publish. So now you see that my filter has updated and it now shows 0 unpublished strings. However, if I go to translated, I now see all of my recently published translations. Right, so I know for many of you, this is a more involved process than your typical workflow. If you need to publish quickly after having translations delivered back from TransPerfect, you could just filter for unpublished, mark the check box, and then publish them. If you want to skip this step altogether, you can reach out to your TransPerfect team, and they'll work with us to update the default delivery to target instead of draft. That being said, this type of workflow is particularly helpful for users with the reviewer/translator roles, since they're not able to publish translations. They can set the status to accepted, and then once their review is complete, an admin, manager, or owner could come into the project, filter for that status or unpublished, and publish those translations. They could even use the custom filter option to more specifically narrow it down. Not custom status, custom. So you could click the state of accepted and not empty draft. That would just mean that you have a draft translation with an accepted status. I don't have that here anymore, but you could do that here as well. All right. So that takes us through more of the basic how-tos of reviewing translations on Applanga. So that brings me to an important point, and that's the outdated translations. Projects with outdated translations happen when someone makes a change to the source text while there is an open order for translations. I went over this a little bit before, but it's easy to get lost in translation. Forgive my pun. So when the translation is delivered back to the project, it'll be flagged as an outdated translation. It's an important warning to keep an eye out for during the review process. Sometimes these changes to source text don't actually impact the meaning of the entry, and in those cases, you could approve those outdated translations. Let me show you how to find and approve some. So again, I'm going to use my handy dandy filter. I'm going to come down to with issues. And then I'm going to come down to translation outdated. So we have two here. One, we have what looks like a typo that was corrected. And then for this one, we have one where the meaning doesn't really change. So again, I could pull up the changelog to see exactly how it was changed. And again, I can click this to get a complete breakdown, or I could just read the color coding. So again, looks like a typo was fixed here. So I'm going to leave that one alone, but I could come to my burned and burnt one. And since these words essentially mean the same thing, I can approve this one. So I'll check the checkbox. I'll use the more dropdown, and then I'm going to say approve outdated target. Yes, this is in target. So now that one is no longer in my translated outdated filter. And if I go to all, I can search for, and now we see we no longer have that warning. All right, so now that we've covered the basics and some important notes, we can move on to some of those helpful features I mentioned towards the beginning of the webinar, and you may have seen throughout. Before we move on, all the features I'm about to show you reside at the team level. So you'll only need to set these up once for a team instead of for every project under a team. With that being said, the first thing I'd like to cover is how to add reviewers/translators to your team. We saw earlier that users with the role of reviewer/translator can only add and update drafts. This is great for users who are concerned about translations only. Maybe they're from an outside translation service, or maybe they're a bilingual member of your team who aren't technically inclined. Regardless of your particular role on the team, you can still add a reviewer as long as there are open seats on the team. So to add those reviewers, I'll need to navigate back to the team first. I can click the team name here from my open editor. I can go back to my project and click the team name here. And then I can also use the drop down and grab my teams here. I do have quite a few teams on this account, so to prevent any confusion, we'll just go straight to my team here. All right. I'll scroll down, and now we're in our team members section. So from here, I'll click add team member. I'll need to enter in their email. I'm just going to add myself. And then I'll click the role of translator/reviewer. Now, if they are brand new to Applanga, as in they've never logged in before, you'll also need to enter their name as well. But I'll go ahead and click add. So now I'll receive an email notification letting me know that I've been invited to join this team on Applanga as a translator/reviewer. Right? So the next helpful feature for translation reviews is user groups. As I said before, you can configure user groups to review specific languages based on certain statuses. They'll even receive notifications when entries in those languages get updated to those statuses. Anyone you want to add to the user group must already be a member of the team on Applanga, which we just went over how to do. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and create a user group. I'll click add user group. I'll give my user group a name. In this case, I want to be pretty specific. As you begin to add more and more groups, it can just be a little confusing if you have very generic or non-descriptive names. All right, so in this case, I'm just going to add reviewers for English US. If you come down here, you see all of the languages in all of the projects I have, not just the one project I was working on. So in this case, I'll grab English US, and then I'll click Reviewer. So now anytime a string gets a status of needs review, anyone added to this user group will get an email notification. I'll scroll back down and I'll make myself and this person English reviewers. Alrighty. So this feature is also helpful for teams using outside translation services. You could also add those translators. And then anytime a status of needs translation is added to a string, then they would get that notification letting them know that they need to come translate. All right. You can also use this to limit access to languages. In this case, you wouldn't even have to have the reviewer. You would just say English United States, and then this translator would only have access to edit in English US, right? But I just want them to be a reviewer, and I'll click add. And now we have that brand new user group, right? Now that we've covered adding additional team members and creating user groups, we're on to our last helpful feature at the team level, and that's custom statuses. In the event that you have a more complex use case with several checks and balances, it may be helpful to add those custom statuses for your team. Maybe you have some entries for a new feature that need to be prioritized over others. I could create a custom status called priority. So to create my custom status, I'll grab add custom status. I'll enter the name, priority, did I spell that right? Yes. And then I can give it a fun color. I really like turquoise, so let's just grab this fun turquoise color. Now if I click add, scroll down, I see my new custom status. And I could go back to my project and I could use that new custom status. Whoops. I'll use state. And then you get a drop down for any of those custom statuses over here. So we'll say priority. And then I'll click save. Alrighty, so I think that's everything I had. Oh, actually, one last thing I do want to show you guys. Say you don't have enough seats, or maybe you want to have review for one of your languages outside of Applanga, but you still need to be able to import it back into Applanga. You can still export that Excel I mentioned earlier. So here I'm going to filter for unpublished. I'm going to select my unpublished entries, and then I'll click export. I'm going to leave this export currently selected entries. I'm going to select Excel. I just want it for Russia and Ukraine. I'll want to export those drafts, and then I can export into an Excel, and then I could pass it on to reviewers outside of Applanga for them to review. Then once I have that Excel back from them, I would click import. I can drag and drop my file here, and when I import, I can automatically assign a status, or I could import as target instead of draft. You get a little bit of control over how those strings will behave once you import them. Okay, so that's all I had. So let me pull up my PowerPoint again. Right. So we've covered everything on our agenda for today. We discussed the pros of reviewing translations on Applanga, how to review and publish those translations, as well as some helpful features like user groups and the custom statuses we just went over. I know we covered a lot of content in this webinar, and I know I can talk a little fast. So now I'll open the floor up for questions. I think I saw one or two come in through the chat. Christian?
I'm gonna mute myself. All right. Thank you, Aisha. Thanks very much. And thanks for your questions that you sent over. So I have a couple of questions, a couple of people asking me around when they're using Project Director together with Applanga, which is the technology, like the overarching technology of Global Link that holds it all together in the background. So if you're using Project Director, you can skip all that we have shown here basically today and decide to do the review step in Project Director as well. And then it already reviewed translations will come back to Applanga. So you not only can kind of keep everything in Project Director as you did before, we can also configure it in a way that what we've shown here today, like it will not be imported as draft, but directly published. It will not be imported as needs review. It can be set to any other workflow status that you want, for example, already accepted, or we can set a custom state when you say reviewed in Project Director, and then everything that's reviewed in Project Director you want to do in other a device testing round, a PLT round, for example, you can do that based on that statuses. So you have these options as well. It's simply a way of configuring it. However, what I also got is like for the screenshots. So yes, we can also have translated screenshots, but for that, the content has first to come back to Applanga. So only after you delivered it back, either via an order or via your product director integration, then translated screenshots can be generated. These can then be uploaded again and then reviewed. So if you do any kind of testing or screenshot review, that has to happen on Applanga simply by how the content first has to come back to us so that we can create these screenshots. I also had some questions around imports and exports. So basically how our Excel importer works is we have a way to pick what is in which column. So for example, if you would say you export the Excel and you have the first column is the ID, the second one is the English, the third is the draft or whatever you have exported. If you then ask your reviewer, for example, to leave their comments in an additional column, just basically everything you edits, paste them in the additional column. If you then re-import the file, you can then pick this additional column to import just what is in there, basically. In any case, if you make the changes to the existing content or if you make an additional column, when you import something, we look into the file, we compare and what we currently have, and we will only update those that are different. So we will not overwrite any existing stuff with just another import message or anything. We will just keep it as is and only look for the changes in the file that you give us back for the import. Let me go through. I think I covered that. I think I covered that. Yeah, I had a question around the status and the statuses, the status, the plural form of status is always, I take another one every time, basically. So for the states, you only can have one state status per string per language. So it can have obviously have different statuses per languages, but in a given language, you can only ever have one at a time. So it can only be in needs review or in order or accepted, so that we can kind of make sure everything works through that through a flow. However, for applying the states, I already showed you that you can do it on bulk to kind of move something from needs review to accepted. The same goes the other way around. Obviously, if you are a manager and need to set of strings, you search for something, you filter for something, you mark it, and then you put it into a status, and that giving a user group maybe assigns it automatically to a person. But you can also in the same interface then set the status for all languages or specific languages as well. So let's say you work in English as a copywriter, you have everything done for a feature, a new set of strings that came in. Now they are reviewed on the English side. You mark them all in English, and then in the same status pop-up, instead of selecting your current language, you select all other languages or target languages, which is like 5 or 6. And then you basically set that status in other languages from whatever language you work in at the moment. So you have that control as well. And I think, let me just go over it again. Yeah, there was the question, right? So obviously we are, there's a part of the pricing limits how many users you can have, how many team members you can have. And obviously you are free to share a login across your users. Like we will not stop you from it. But we talked about the changelog for a moment. So if you would share a login across multiple users, if all reviewers have something like reviewers at yourcompany.com, and everybody would make changes across multiple languages. Obviously, if you can trace back who uses it per language, then that might still be kind of variable. But otherwise, obviously, in the changelog, the user that made all changes across all these languages will be the same one. So it might be hard to figure out who changed what, other than that it was the person using that specific login. So we recommend that reviewers have their dedicated logins, or that you maybe group them together as a reviewers per language or something like that. If you have any questions around that and how to make that possible for your use case, please also feel free to approach us. Our pricing, as it is on the website, or as you might experience it, is obviously it's like packaged together. But we always want to see that if there's a use case that goes into one of the extremes, like say you have just one product but hundreds of reviewers, then we kind of figure out a package that would make it work for you as well. And yes, that would be it on the questions. Obviously, we leave it open for another 5 minutes if something runs in your mind, but I will stop the recording now and officially close that part. We will then share the recording as soon as possible via the same channel that you got the invite for the webinar, basically. Stop.